And warmer from the low, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined in just a minute or two by Curtis Rogers, who does amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. We're going to be chatting with him about how Washington has mixed up their NIL, I guess you'd call it, decisions, and have mixed up the way that they are dispersing the income after, well, Great Osipor made all the money last year and nobody else got any, and this year they've done a much better job of being able to distribute that wealth, so we'll be talking about that. Just the overall landscape in college basketball right now, how many of these Big Ten teams have, for lack of a better term, gotten with the program, gotten with the times, and then in the final segment, I'm going to give you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball Monday. Also talk a little bit about Gonzaga with him as well, since he's out there in the great state of Washington, so that's all coming up on the show today. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, right now doing a lot of two-part podcasts because I'm not getting a lot of Twitter/X questions, and I'll reserve for a three-part podcast the first segment all to it. So fire in those questions if you have them, and you've got two ways of firing those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at GNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review, and did not get in any today, so please do fire those in. And everything today, it is brought to you by Edge Boost. Over at edgeboost.bet, when you type in that promo code of Greg, you get a $1 match on your first deposit of $25. That's edgeboost.bet, promo code GREG, and they're making sure that bettors are able to access their funds every single day, 24/7, because they are not like some places are running on credit or anything like that. It's just an account that you're able to utilize and you're able to earn cashback rewards from, and you're able to draw from it at any time. Now, let's draw on the wealth of knowledge that is Curtis Rogers, who does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. This time of year, he goes into a little bit more baseball mode, as he is a pre- and post-game host of the Seattle Mariners on the radio side of things. I know that he's also taking a look at a little bit of hockey, though. The Seattle Kraken, that's an interesting ordeal, as they canned their coach, I believe, 24 to 48 hours ago. So there's a lot of good, clean family fun happening out there in the great state of Washington, out there in the lovely city of Seattle. And you're able to follow Curtis on Twitter/X, along with Instagram at A Kid From Ken. And Curtis, always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Greg, always happy to hop on. Yeah, we're all about good, clean family fun here, but the transfer portal, it can get a little messy, it can get a little dirty at times, but it's just a part of college sports that we have to come to accept in 2025. It's not going anywhere, but lots of movement across the landscape of college basketball, especially up here in the Northwest. It's been an interesting just couple of weeks, really, since the end of the NCAA tournament, seeing all sorts of movement here. We've only got, less than 24 hours left before the portal closes, too. So if your name's not in there, get in if you got plans to make some cash here.
Yep, it's a smoke them if you've got them sort of situation for that. And boy, have there been a lot of players smoking them, because we've got more guys in the transfer portal than are not in the transfer portal as of right now. At last check, I was seeing 2,357 players in the transfer portal. And how do we just try to wrap our minds around all of this? Because I mean, even for someone like myself that does a daily podcast, I'm sure that there are guys that are going through the cracks of myself, let alone someone that might be just casually looking at this like once or twice a week.
It is a weird spot that we find ourselves in, especially like, say, if you're a Florida fan. I know a few players who were on the national championship winning team, they've entered the portal, and it's like, you just won a national championship. And, I feel like if Florida brings back a majority of their guys, they could be a really fun team in 2025. But, hey, you're going to probably see big dollar signs somewhere else. A lot of these schools, especially the ones in the SEC, have some pretty deep pockets. As we saw this last year, the SEC was the best conference we've maybe ever seen in college basketball. I think NIL had a lot to do with it. Just from a casual fan perspective, I wonder, though, if it is harder for casual fans to invest as much time and energy in following college basketball and following college football, because the names change so frequently. It's not just head coaching changes, but it's just the players. You can't really expect to see players stick around for 3-4 years in the same school anymore. I know my alma mater, Arizona, if you look at their starting 5 from this NCAA tournament, all 5 players were transfer players. None of them were recruited by Arizona originally out of high school. And that's another thing, too, is that, you've seen high school kids not get the same kind of interest that they used to Well, I believe it was Rick Pitino who said just a few weeks ago prior to the NCAA tournament, maybe it was a couple months ago now, where he said, I'm not even going to bother recruiting high school players for this upcoming season. It's just going to be strictly transfers because you don't have to worry about developing those guys. They come already prepackaged and ready to go. So those are just kind of the ramifications of this NIL culture, this transfer portal culture that we find ourselves in college basketball. Not to say that's ruining the sport. I mean, obviously, the NCAA tournament is still just one of the great events on the sporting calendar. And as we saw, it's not like the transfer portal hurt the TV ratings. It was one of the highest rated Final Fours of all time. And I believe the first round was the most watched first round of all time as well. So the casual viewer, even though, they may not be investing so much in the day-to-day of college basketball, definitely still paying with rapt attention come NCAA tournament time.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I feel like with the school in your neck of the woods, the Washington Huskies, they found out all about the NIL and transfer portal experience because they last season spent $100 billion on Grados for 20 cents on everyone else. And guess what? One player could not carry them. And I've just noticed a different approach this offseason with Washington. They've done a nice job of being able to spread the wealth. They've got maybe not that one big guy in Grados Sport coming in, but they've got more well-rounded pieces. And I feel like they've done a good job of learning from the mistakes that they made last season, and they're not going to commit them this offseason.
I agree. I think this is going to be a much better roster that they have put together this upcoming season. You bring back Zoom Diallo. You bring back Frank Kepning for his 20th year of eligibility. He's been around the block multiple times in college basketball. And I mean, those are two guys that I think are definitely worth holding on to if you're Washington. But you mentioned just the success that they've had in the portal right now. And also they've got a pretty good freshman class coming in. I mean, I look at Wesley Yates from USC, who had a really good season. Yates heading back to Washington, where he started his college basketball career, just redshirted his freshman year, didn't see the court, ends up transferring to USC, has a really good season last year. Now he's back with Washington. Bryson Tucker from Indiana, the former five-star recruit, he goes to Washington. And then Jacob Ognjanovic, I think that's a name, too, that is going to be really interesting to watch. Kamari Peterson, Lathan Somerville, I mean, they've got really good transfer class. I believe it is a top 4 or 5 transfer portal class. Pair that with an 11th ranked recruiting class that's just from 24/7 Sports. I mean, you're looking at a Washington team where I think the floor has been raised significantly compared to what it was at any point under Mike Hopkins, and certainly in year one of the Danny Sprinkle era. I thought it was interesting last year seeing Sprinkle get criticism for not being able to turn things around right away, and I got to push back on that and say, are you not aware of what was left for Danny Sprinkle when he took over at Washington? Inherited just a horrific situation after Mike Hopkins was given the boot. So the fact that he was able to kind of keep things afloat a little bit last year and now build off of that, I mean, it's good to see a second-year head coach have some recruiting momentum after his first season. You do tend to see a lot of recruiting momentum, guys who are new on the job, and year two especially. That is a very important year in terms of getting your guys in and getting players that you think are going to be able to help out in a big way. And so, Washington is a team that has definitely opened some eyes here early on in the college basketball offseason. I think expectations for them this season, if they can get to the NCAA tournament, that would be a smashing success. I don't know if it's guaranteed or anything like that because of how deep the Big Ten can be, but I think Washington is a team that, based off of the offseason that they've had, the trajectory is pointing.
Yep, I think so as well. And I think that the entire Big Ten has been doing a little bit of soul searching the last few seasons, and they've done a good job of getting with the times as well. As we've got our good friend Curtis Rogers over at 710 Seattle Sports joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, because I'm not sure about you, but it feels like there are more schools that are diving into the transfer portal, and there's more schools in general that are trying to play a little bit more of a, shall we say, up-tempo, fun brand of basketball than we saw for the longest time, where it felt like every single one of these teams in the Big Ten was ranked like 300th in terms of tempo. All of these teams were looking to play these games where it was first of 50 wins. And now in the Big Ten, we really saw that on full display last season. We've got more up-tempo teams, and we've got more teams that are willing to let it fly.
Absolutely. And I think, like you mentioned, I mean, just those teams kind of learning from years past. I mean, if you're a 4 or 5 star kid that loves to run up and down the court and loves to play a high flying kind of offense, the old Big Ten did not appeal to many of those guys. And I do kind of wonder, especially the Big Ten and the national title drought that they have, if it weren't for the Pac 12 disbanding, they would have the second longest title drought of any power conference. Now they have the longest title drought of any power conference. It's been since Michigan State, which is back in 2000, which is nuts to think about, especially considering the amount of teams that they've had reach the national championship game. I know Michigan's gotten there a couple of times in that stretch. Michigan State against UNC. Purdue was just there 2 years ago. Illinois has made it that far. Ohio State's made it that far. It's not for a lack of trying, for sure, but I think the Big Ten, especially now with 18 teams in that conference, you're just going to get more bites at the apple. I don't know if it's going to be a guarantee that that streak ends within the next year or two, but I think the Big Ten is definitely much more open to kind of seeing how the game is played outside of just, 48-45, 52-50, those kinds of final scores. It's 2025. Basketball is played at a very high pace, obviously in the professional ranks. College basketball, not quite there yet in terms of pacing, but it's definitely much more up-tempo than it used to be. And I think it's good to see the Big Ten kind of get with the program and get with the times.
Yep, absolutely. With the way that Wisconsin was able to play much more up tempo this past season and them be able to hit the transfer portal, I think that that's big for them. And it just is very much a changing landscape in college basketball as well, Curtis. And just how do you take a look at this game differently now than you did even like 3 to 4 years ago? Because I feel like with college basketball, you could always start your like conference previews, what have you, in like April, May, things like that. And now not going to be able to do quite as much of that because we've got a billion guys in the portal. We've got the NBA draft process, and there's a lot of moving parts, and there's much more of an offseason than we've had in past years.
Absolutely. And, you see all the way too early top 25 rankings come out after the national championship game. And I just kind of think to myself, like, what's the point in doing this while the portal is still open? What's the point in doing this while all these guys are still changing hands and you don't know who's on anybody's roster right now? There's still, freshman recruits who still haven't picked a school where they're going. That to me is an interesting wrinkle in all of this because 5 or 6 years ago, once the national championship game was over, outside of a few transfers, outside of a few graduate transfers where, you could transfer after receiving your bachelor's degree and going into grad school, that was kind of the only thing that would maybe have an impact on the college basketball season outside of bringing in your freshman recruits and just kind of retaining all this talent that you had. And nowadays, I mean, once the tournament is over, everybody hits the portal. And I don't know how much of it is about retaining or talent acquisition, but there are a lot of schools that have lost a ton of talent over the last couple of years. And for whatever reason, they're, still able to kind of replenish things. And then also, you look at Kansas last year where they dipped into the portal heavy and everybody thought that they were going to run away with the national championship. And, they were preseason number one. And no, at least one time during the regular season, they fell out of the AP top 25. They made it to the NCAA tournament, but again, did not play very well. So it's no guarantee. The portal is such a crapshoot, even though these players are usually, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, for whatever reason, just kind of assimilating the style of these head coaches whose coaching styles are set in stone that aren't going to be changing much for anybody. You also see a lot of these great head coaches kind of hanging it up. We've seen a lot of names in the ACC over the last few years retire. Coach K, Roy Williams, Jim Boeheim, Tony Bennett, Jim Larinaga. You don't see a lot of these guys sticking around much anymore just because of the changing landscape of college basketball. Whether that's a good thing or not, that remains to be seen. It stinks to see all these name brand coaches leave, but you want to get somebody in there that is going to put in that elbow grease, that's going to put in that hard work in order to get the job done. It's not like these jobs aren't undesirable. You just got to find the right guy who wants to put in that time and effort.
Yep, you do have to find that right guy, and when you do, things are able to get off and running for you, and if you don't, you can be in the abyss for quite a while. We do have Curtis Rogers, who does amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, and have to ask about this team as well, because for Gonzaga. We recall the last few off seasons, they didn't add a lot of transfers, but they added in the right guys, and they've had much more attention than what we've seen out of most teams here in the last few years in college basketball in this day and age where 100 million billion guys transfer. They've been able to do a good job of keeping their own. But what's the feel around this team this offseason? Because there are a few guys that are just flat out of eligibility for Gonzaga. And as of right now, lone guy that they've got up on the board in terms of a transfer coming in is Jalen Worley, a guy that was solid over at Virginia, but I think that we both agree, not necessarily a game changer for them.
Yeah, definitely not to the caliber of Nemhard or anybody like that, Graham Ike, over the last few years. You look at their losses in the portal, Dusty Stromer going to Grand Canyon, Michael Ajayi, he goes to Butler, I believe. I had higher hopes for Ajayi when he went to Gonzaga, just was not able to find the same kind of success that he had at Pepperdine with Gonzaga. And Dusty Stromer, I mean, definitely a highly rated recruit, but just was not able to kind of reach that potential. And maybe it was because Gonzaga had a very set-in-stone backcourt of Nemhard and Nolan Hickman, guys that just a really long resume in college basketball. Look at Gonzaga right now, and I think obviously they're still going to be the class of the WCC for at least one more season. But then who knows what it's going to be like once they move to the Pac-12, the new Pac-12. I think this Gonzaga team still is going to be a force, obviously, how deep their talent is. You know, I don't think their ceiling right now could be what it was heading into the season, which was one where it was like, oh, this could be a national championship contender if things go right. Unfortunately, things did not go right for them. They get bounced in the second round, and then you're kind of left in this weird spot of, okay, Gonzaga nearly missed the NCAA tournament last year. If they hadn't won the WCC, you kind of wonder what they would have done. Would they have been able to clinch a spot in the NCAA tournament? I think maybe, but it was not a sure thing. So hopefully that chip on the shoulder from last season is there, and this Gonzaga team comes out firing next year, because it's obviously college basketball is a lot more fun when they're rolling and when they're getting things going. So maybe that was sort of a wake up call this last season for Mark Few and his team to kind of be like, you know what, we're better than our record indicated. Time to go out and get back to business here and maybe trim some of that fat off.
Yep, no doubt about it. I think that's going to be interesting to see what they do moving forward, because you have to think that Gonzaga is not done in the transfer portal, and if they are, man, that's not necessarily great, especially with them having an impending move on up to the Pac-12, and that WCC is going to be very interesting, to say the least, over the next few years, because we know that schools like Seattle, Grand Canyon are going to be added there as well. So you've got a lot of intrigue happening in college basketball. And Curtis, I know you're covering it all over there at 710 Seattle Sports, and do a little bit of everything. The Seattle Mariners, college basketball. We've got some hockey action now with the Seattle Kraken canning their coach. So everything's coming together. Oh, yeah, and there's something called the NFL Draft happening in the next few days as well. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, what was it? There was a movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Kind of what's going on up here in the Great Northwest. But yeah, like you said, Greg, there's something for everybody. SeattleSports.com is the place to go to access all of our content. And you can follow along on Twitter and Instagram at A Kid from Kent. And Greg, always happy to hop on with you, especially talking portal. Just 2 weeks removed from the NCAA tournament. I cannot get enough college basketball. I know you can't get enough college basketball. So us sickos, we got to find our way to scratch that itch in the off season, and no better way to do it than this.
Absolutely. The 14 days since the end of the college basketball season, it felt more like 14 years. So hopefully we are able to get things going sooner rather than later, and to be able to pass the time. We love talking with guys like Curtis, who do such an amazing job gauging the sport that we all know and love. So big thanks, Curtis, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. So coming in next, I'll give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Monday. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. It is always great to be joined by Curtis Rogers, who does such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. Today, get a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Really covers a little bit of everything. I know that this time of year, his main beat is being the pre- and post-game host for the Seattle Mariners, so he does an absolutely tremendous job on that front, and every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to our good friend and Mr. Curtis for joining me me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of all the news and notes that we saw in college basketball on Monday, and boy, there was absolutely no shortage of news and notes in college basketball that we saw on Monday, as we saw Mongolian Mike Shurajamitz. He was over at last season Utah. He's been a well-traveled man as he spent some time over with the Dons of San Francisco as well. He has decided that he is going to be going to South Carolina. Not a guy that is going to be like taking over the game or anything like that, but that said, this is someone that is able to do a pretty rock-solid job in terms of just give you a little bit of this and that. The guy stands in between about 6'8", 6'9", and he last year was able to contribute about 7 points, 3 boards. He was able to give you a little bit of something from three-point range. He's going to help distribute as well. Just a really good, well-rounded player. I think that he's going to be able to fit in very well over at South Carolina. For South Carolina, they do like those holes greater than some of its parts sort of guys, as last few seasons it's been all about what you've been able to get out of the big man and Colin Murray Boyles, and I think that he's going to be able to very much fit the South Carolina system in general, and it's going to be interesting to see what we get out of South Carolina this season, as well as they've been a little bit slow here in the transfer portal, but they're starting to pick things up with Christ Edesunko coming in. Michi Johnson was an 8 double-figure scorer for them a few seasons ago. He is back after he started his career at Ohio State, went to South Carolina, then he went back to Ohio State. Now he's back at South Carolina, so that's the way that things go in this day and age, but I do like what he's able to provide there, so that's going to be a pick up from them. This was something big as well. Nana Wusu-Onane, it looked like he was going to go to SMU 2 seasons ago, was able to average 14.5 points, right around 8.5 rebounds per game over at Brown. Missed all season due to injury. Looked like he was going to be a relatively solid pickup, but that is not going to be the case, as he has decided that he is going to be leaving SMU, so that's a bit of an issue that you've got, and with this SMU program, they have been able to do a pretty solid job here in the transfer portal. They've got no shortage of guys that they're going to be able to rely upon for this upcoming season, and I believe just within the last 48 or so hours, they've got a few pickups as well, as they were able to get Corey Washington in from Wichita State as well, but that no doubt is going to be a big blow, and that's going to be hurting them a little bit. This is a pickup that I really do like. Mustafa Team, he's going to be staying in the Big 12. He was over at last season at Central Florida, able to give the team 2.5 blocks per contest, one of the best shot blockers in all of college basketball, 10.5 points, 6.5 rebounds per game. He has decided that he is going to be going to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is going to be back on to playing really good defense, and for this Bearcat system, they always do a good job of being able to find these big men. Now, the scoring is going to be a little bit of a question mark once again for Cincinnati. They were one of the, shall we say, lesser three-point shooting teams in all of college basketball, but that said, I do think that this is going to be a Cincinnati unit that is going to be able to get up and running. Again, I still really have a good belief in this coaching staff in general. I do believe that you're going to be able to see Wes Miller be able to get things online, has yet to be able to reach the NCAA tournament with Cincinnati. They made the Crown tournament. That's not necessarily where you want to be if you're Cincinnati, but I do think that there's quite a bit of upside with this program. Bringing in a guy that just fits a system like this is solid, and they're also going to be bringing in Jalen Celestine, who's coming over from Baylor. Jalen Haynes is another rock-solid defender. He's going to be coming in, and they did get Kirk Kriisa as well as back for about his 500th year of college basketball, so some pretty good pickups here in the offseason for Cincinnati. You've got George Washington bringing in Gene Onamarujan. He last season was over at the Pride of Austria, began his career over at Iona, 14 points, 5.5 boards, 4 assists per game. A relatively good three-point shooter, not a guy that's going to shoot like 40+% from 3 points, but he's able to be a mid to high 30s three-point shooter. I do like this pickup for George Washington, and for George Washington, they did a nice job slowing down last season, playing some better defense. He's going to be joining Trey Dinkins in that backcourt who comes on over from Duquesne, so I do think that they're starting to build something relatively rock-solid over there. Something else that is very rock-solid. How about the fact that Ian Jackson, he has decided that he is going to be going to St. John's. Last season as a freshman over at North Carolina, shot 40% from 3, 12 points per game. This is exactly what St. John's was missing last season. St. John's had pretty much all the goods except for a guy that was able to pop it and lock it from 3. Now Ian Jackson leaving a little bit of something to be desired for a St. John's team that was amazing with regards to their defense last season, but when you have a coach like Rick Pitino, that defense is very coachable. I think that he's going to be able to get that in him, and I do think that this is going to be exactly what St. John's needed, and St. John's doing themselves a relatively rock-solid job in the transfer portal right now, as they've been able to do a nice job of being able to pick up guys that they have a few guys of splash, they have a few guys that are a little bit more, shall we say, stake, as well as they pick up Bryce Hopkins, who's coming on over from Providence. You've got Jusan Sanan, who's coming on over from Arizona State, Oziah Sellers. This is a really well-rounded, rock-solid team, and I do like what Slick Rick Pitino has been able to develop there. KJ Robinson, he last season was playing over at Hofstra. Rock-solid player, 5.5 points at 6'3", wasn't necessarily able to be some sort of a transcendent three-point shooter or anything like that, but was a solid contributor for a Hofstra team that saw some success. He's going to be going on over to New Hampshire. For New Hampshire last year, it was just Murphy's Law for the team. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. They were dealing with injury upon injury, bringing in a guy in Robinson who's pretty well-rounded. He's a relatively solid defender. He's going to be able to give you some nice scoring. I think that this is exactly what New Hampshire needed, and for New Hampshire, it's been a little bit slow going in the transfer portal for them, but now they've got him coming in, and they also picked up Reginald Kennedy as well. He was a point guard over at UAB that just couldn't see a lot of minutes out there on the floor. Bringing in these two guys should be able to help them elevate a little bit more, so I do like what these guys are going to be able to bring to the table. I like what this man brings to the table as well. Xavier Brown, he was over at St. Joe's this last season. He's looking to not be average Joe, and he is going to be adding on over to Oklahoma this past year. 17.5 points, 4.3 assists, 5 rebounds, C.O.5 per game. Not necessarily the most amazing three-point shooter in the world, but I think that he's going to do a good job of being able to acclimate himself to an Oklahoma system that last few seasons they've been one of the best three-point shooting defenses in all of college basketball. He's going to be joining Nigel Pack, who he was over at Miami the last few seasons, part of that Final Four team. Tay Davis, he's a well-rounded player that's going to be coming in from Notre Dame as well, so do like what he's able to bring to the table, and I do like what this Oklahoma team is starting to build as well. Emmanuel Ugbo, he was over at Boise State this past season, was averaging about 3 points, 2.5 rebounds per game. He was more of a, shall we say, off-the-bench sort of player that was able to come in and give you a little bit of defense. He has decided that he is going to go to Washington State, and that's big because for Washington State, I do feel like they needed a little bit more size in the post. You can tell that things really went downhill for them when they lost to Darius Coward due to an injury. They got off to that hot start to the season, then fizzled a little bit. This is really one of two pickups that they've got. They also bring in Jerome Morton, who is a really good three-point shooter over at Morehead State, so you're going to need to get a little bit more into the program, but so far so good in terms of pickups that they do have right now. You've got a few other pickups as well, as you've got Dior Connors, who was over at Appalachian State this last season. He was averaging a little bit over 8 points per contest, shot 40% from three. He's going to be becoming an Ohio Bobcat. Now, for the Bobcats, they really need to up their defense last season because typically Jeff Bowles' teams are just very well coached in general. I like what Jeff Bowles has been able to do in general, but that said, when it comes down to it, his team just did not necessarily step up on the defensive side of things, and Dior Connors coming over from an Appalachian State team that's always pretty rough and tumble with regards to their defense. That's going to be able to help them out. Now, was a little bit of a one-trick pony in that he shot threes, he was able to defend a little bit, but really didn't do anything else, but I do think that he's going to be a valuable addition for an Ohio team that they're starting to get it going in the transfer portal. They're also bringing in Jalen Breath, a big man from UNC Greensboro, Javon Simmons, who is a rock-solid scorer over at Toledo. He's coming in as well, so far so good in terms of their transfer portal haul, and I do think that things are going to be getting better for them a little bit more moving forward, and for some reason, Cam Hayes is entering into the transfer portal. He's played 5 years of college basketball. I don't know what's happening here. We're seeing more and more of these guys that are just fishing for eligibility at this point. I wish I could call it anything else, but you got guys fishing for eligibility right now, so that's going to be fun. And I was mentioning this with Cincinnati a little bit before, but Jalen Celestine, he did actually commit on Monday as well, so do want to just give you guys a little bit of the down low on him. Shot 35% from three, 7 points per contest this past year over at Baylor, began his career over at Cal, so a very good pickup there. Denzel Aberdeen, he was a part of that Florida team that was able to win the national title, and he was a solid player. Wasn't a starter for them or anything like that, but 7.5 points per contest, a good but not great three-point shooter. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to Kentucky. For Kentucky, I think that this is a rock-solid add for them. He's going to be able to give them a little bit of defensive switchability as well, which I think is going to be very big for Kentucky because they were a bunch that was a little bit, shall we say, vulnerable with regards to their down-low defense this season, and with Kentucky, I think that they're building themselves a really nice roster, as you've got Jaden Quantins, who comes over from Arizona State. That gives them some rough and tumble down low. Cam Williams is not necessarily a flashy name, but comes in from Tulane at 6'8". He's got some versatility. Mohamedou Abate coming on over from Alabama. Jalen Lowe from Pittsburgh. They don't necessarily have as much three-point shooting as they did a season ago, but they certainly have much more defense than they did last season, so I like the direction that they're going in. Cameron McCarr, he was over at St. John's this last season. He just did not really see any minutes out there on the floor whatsoever. A 7'1" freshman. I believe that he was a top 100 recruit, just didn't really see any minutes out there on the floor. He has decided that he is going to be going on over to DePaul, and for DePaul, they're just really looking to be able to build themselves northward. They were able to win more games last season, albeit they were still very rough out there in Big East play, but They were able to get some wins, and I do think that they need a little bit more than what they're getting right now. They bring in like R.J. Smith from Colorado. I don't think that that does much for you. Brandon Macklin was okay over at Radford, but I'm not really seeing it with this team. I would say that this is the biggest ad that they've had thus far, figuratively and literally. And Caleb Banks coming over from Tulane, that is actually one that I very much do like as well. But for DePaul, they're more respectable now than they were about 12 or so months ago. I can certainly say that they still have a ways to go, but I do feel like with the coaching regime that you've got right now, with everything that they're looking to do under Chris Holtmann, I do feel like things are starting to trend in the right direction. So, that's more than what I've been able to say in the past about DePaul, so that is a good thing for them, and this is also going to be a very good thing as we saw a commitment from Eric Pratt, who was over at UW Milwaukee this last year, 10.5 points, a little bit over a seal per contest. He's decided that he is going to be going to Stony Brook, an uncharacteristically just awful year for Stony Brook this last season. After 2 seasons ago, I think that they were the best cover team in all of college basketball. They have completely revamped that backcourt with bringing in Pratt, and then you've also got Rob Brown, who's a nice sharpshooter, who comes on over from Nichols. Ogun Koljenitz, he's a 7-footer from Wyoming. He's going to be coming in as well for Stony Brook. They're still going to need a few other pieces. You're going to need to get that main point guard, but right now, so far, so good out of them. Justin Fernandez, who has had a long and winding road, didn't see a ton of minutes over at George Mason. He was a reserve for Kim English over at Providence this last season, and when they saw about 3.5 points per contest, he's decided that he is going to be going to Delaware. He just has never really seen the consistent minutes. I believe that he has a little bit of upside. I do think that this is going to be a relatively good ad for Delaware. It's just a little bit of an unknown because he's been on, shall we say, bigger programs, but he's never really gotten the chance to play too much for them. You've got him coming in, and Kevon Riley is going to be back from a season ago, double-figure scorer that was able to shoot it relatively well from 3-point. So if you figure that Fernandez is going to run the point, you do have one of his main running mates already out there, so that's going to be able to be of help for them, but we shall see what this team is going to be able to provide moving forward, and we're going to see what this man is going to be able to provide moving forward as well, as this man decided that he is going to be going to Radford. And Dennis Parker Jr., he last season was over at NC State, saw about 3 points per contest, but when he was a freshman, when NC State was able to make the Final Four, he actually made a little bit of an impact for the team. I'm not going to say that he was like some sort of transcendent player or anything like that, but he was logging about 5 points, a little bit over 3 rebounds per game. Not a guy that's going to be sticking it from 3-point range or anything like that, but that's a solid ad for a Radford team that you can tell that out there in the Big South, you've got a lot of teams with some good NIL funds like Radford, Longwood. They've been able to put a little bit more money into their High Point has been the creme de la creme out there, as they've really done a nice job being able to buy up these guys. But for Radford, you do have some nice pieces are coming in. Jalen Johnson from Tennessee Tech. Dell Jones was a reserve over at Clemson this last year. Brendan Rigsby was able to see some minutes over at Minnesota this last season. Radford building themselves a relatively nice roster. So I do like what is happening there. I do like what is happening here as well, as you've got Brian Enteminu, who last season was over at Merrimack, and he was the Metro Atlantic Player of the Year on the defensive side of things. 8.5 points per contest, but a little bit over 2 blocks per game at 6'7". He has decided that he is going to be signing with Wright State. Wright State has been really lacking defense over the last few seasons. Always a really nice offensive dynamo sort of team, a team that just has no defense whatsoever, though. Being able to bring in there a guy like an Enteminu, who was a part of one of the most rock-solid defenses in all of college basketball, I think is a really good thing for them. So I do love that move. And then I do like this move as well, as the fact that you had a commitment from Julius Mims, who last season was over at Idaho. Over at Idaho, he was averaging 8.5 points per contest, gave you a block per game, and he was even better 2 seasons ago when he was averaging 11 points, 7 rebounds, block and a half per contest. He's heading on over to New Mexico State. This is very much what New Mexico State is looking to do. Now, New Mexico State going to need to get a little bit more 3-point shooting, because last year that was really their kryptonite. They just could not pop it and lock it from 3-point range, but that said, they were a rock-solid defensive team. He's going to be joining Jamel Jones, who comes on over after he was the top scorer over with the Cal State Bakersfield Roadrunners last season. So I do like what he's able to bring to the table, and I think that that is a very good ad for them. I think that this is going to be a pretty rock-solid ad as well. As Wake Forest transfer Churchill Abyss, he was over at Wake Forest and just could not get out there on the floor too much. He has decided that he is going to be going to New Orleans. For New Orleans, if I'm not mistaken, I think Master P is actually helping out in terms of doing some like the GM duties, things like that. So they're looking to be able to build a little bit of something. They were involved in a big giant scandal this past season, so they need to be able to build a little bit of something. And Abbas, I believe that he was part of like the NBA Academy of Africa, so he comes over as a 6'10" big man, a little bit raw, but does have a little bit of upside, and if you're New Orleans, you want to be swinging an upside at this point, so that should be able to help them out a little bit, and this should be of help as well, as you've got Cam Polisi, who was over at Canisius this last season, was the lone guy on the roster that averaged north of 4 rebounds per game, 6.5 points, 5 boards, was on a team that really didn't play a lot of defense. He's going to be going on over to Southern Miss, and hard to believe that Southern Miss, way back in like the Donnie Tyndall days a decade ago, they were consistently getting like 25 wins, even just a few seasons ago. This was a good program, and then they decided to take a swing on our good friend Andre Curbelo, and Andre 3000 just Andre'd out the program. That was not great, to say the least, so we shall see what Southern Miss is now going to be able to do moving forward. But for Southern Miss, they're starting to get going with regards to their transfer portal. They haven't brought in a lot of guys. I believe that this was their first ad, so they have got a long ways to go, and that's not a roster that you really want to be running back, and they won't be running back that roster, so we shall see what is going to be happening there. But we do know what is happening with Zach Keller. He was over at Utah State this last season, only averaged about 3 points per contest. He's going to be going on over to Utah. Now, if he's playing meaningful minutes for Utah, things have went horribly wrong for them, but you know what, that's going to be interesting to say the least. And how about this? This is a classic ad for Shaheem Holloway. You've got Josh Rivera, who was over at Fordham this last season, rock solid player, 10.5 points, 4.5 boards at 6'6", not a guy that's going to light it up from 3-point range, which, yeah, that's how you know that's a Shaheem Holloway guy. Played a lot of defense, didn't necessarily give you anything on the offensive side of things. He's going to be going over to Seton Hall, so yay for Josh Rivera, and he did shoot 31.5% from 3, so he probably does add a little bit of 3-point shooting with Seton Hall with how bad they were from 3-point range last season. But for Seton Hall, we shall see what they're going to try to do to turn over a little bit of a new leaf, because the game very much did pass them by last season, as they just couldn't get anything going whatsoever. They had Adam Clark from Merrimack, who was a 20-point per game scorer, but not a guy that could really shoot it from 3-point range. TJ Simpkins, who was once again able to put the ball in the basket, didn't really shoot it well from 3-point range. You've got two guys that come in from slow tempo styles that scored points but didn't shoot it from 3 coming into this program. Now you had Josh Rivera, so Seton Hall is going to be doubling down on exactly what they did last season, so they're probably going to be in for a relatively rough season. I do like the fact that they're, I guess, playing musical chairs and they're making things look a little bit different, but yeah, I don't know how this is going to be developing for them, so this is going to be interesting to say the least. And this is going to be interesting. Dijonay Diamasi, he last season was over at Southern, limited to just 8 games. He was their main point guard, and he was given the team 9 points, 5 assists before he went down with an injury. Has never been a rock-solid 3-point shooter, but if you look at his last full season during the 2023-24 season, nearly 2 steals, 5 assists, 9.5 points per contest. He was able to do a nice job on that front. He has decided that he is going to be going to Western Carolina. Western Carolina just could not take care of the ball to save their lives last season, and bringing in a guy like a Diamasi, I think is going to be rock solid for them. Western Carolina is certainly going to have their warts, and they are looking to add a little bit more in terms of their NIL funds, what have you, because they're getting passed up by a lot of these schools out there in the SoCon, and this was really their first ad, so we'll see what else they've got up their sleeve. But that's a good place to be able to start, be able to get yourself a nice point guard, and being able to get yourself a nice, shall we say, combo player is always nice. And for Utah State, they're getting that with MJ Collins Jr. He was over at Vanderbilt this last season, part of a team that was one of the best in all of college basketball, being able to generate turnovers, 7.5 points, a little bit over 2 rebounds per game. You've got Gary Clark, who's going to be coming in as well from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So I do like what this Utah State team is starting to build, and I do think that he's going to be able to do a nice job moving forward as well. And then this is a big one for Rhode Island. They're going to be bringing in Miles Corey, who was over at South Alabama last season, a little bit over 4 assists, 14 points per contest. Not a guy that would light you up from 3-point range, but the top scorer for a team that had one of the most intriguing defensive styles that I've ever seen. They encourage you to shoot threes. Like 60% of opponent shots came from 3-point range. So I'm not sure he's going to be able to acclimate with this Rhode Island system. One that was actually one of the better teams in all of college basketball, being able to guard the 3-point arc. And for Rhode Island, it's been a little bit hot and cold for them recently. But I do think that that overall is a pickup that is going to be able to benefit them a little bit more moving forward. You saw Tariq Foster just not be able to get out there on the floor last season for UMass. He's a 6'8" big man that should be able to lend a little bit of versatility and a little bit of help to Albany. He has decided that he is going to be becoming a Great Dane for Albany. They've got a little bit of work to do in the transfer portal, but among these teams out there in their conference in the America East, they've got some good funds. They're bringing in Nasir Muhammad and Will Richardson as well. Like, I think that they've done a very solid job, actually, in the transfer portal, being able to add those 2 scorers and Richardson along with Muhammad. Now you add in there a guy that's able to give you a little bit more on the post. They've got a little bit of something building there, so good on them. For Hawaii, the Rainbow Warriors are going to be bringing in Trey Bullock. Last season over at South Dakota, he was a very good shooter. He was able to give you 12 points, a little bit over a steal and a half per contest. Not necessarily a light you up from 3-point range sort of guy, but For Hawaii, they do need a little bit more outside scoring. They just need a little bit more offense in general. Always a rock-solid defensive team. And for Bullock, he was on a team that they lacked a little bit of defense, so there's that aspect of things. But all in all, I do like this pickup for them. It's a little bit of a change of pace for Hawaii. That's going to be able to give them a little bit more rough and tumble as well. This is going to hopefully give Canisius a little bit more rough and tumble as well. Khalil Singleton, he was over at Holy Cross this last season, was averaging about 6.5 points per contest, shot 40% from three. He's going to Canisius. Canisius was actually a pretty decent shooting team last season, but they were just absolutely awful on defense, and Holy Cross was absolutely awful on defense as well. So I guess this is going to fit the Canisius, sort of system relatively well for the Golden Griffins after they had their worst year in quite a long time. They've done a nice job in the transfer portal. They're bringing in Singleton, Miles Wilmoth, who is a nice shot blocker over at Sienna's coming in, Marcus Nieblak, he's got a really nice bag, he's able to give you double figures, everything like that. He's coming in as well, so I like these ads for them. Asim Jones, he was over at Florida National this last season. He's going to be heading up to the Northeast. He's going to be heading on over to Quinnipiac. Well-rounded player. About 9.5 points, 2 assists, 1.2 steals per contest. He was really that, shall we say, number 2, number 3 option for Florida National this past year with Jaden Brewer being a little bit of a do-it-all guy. Now, Jones leaves something to be desired in terms of three-point shooting, but for Quinnipiac, I think that he's going to do a nice job of being able to fit this system. For Quinnipiac, they do want these guys that are relatively versatile. They're able to do a whole bunch of different things, and he certainly is able to fit the bill there. So I think that he's going to be able to do a nice job on that front. Kobe King, he is going to be looking to be a king for Utah State, as Utah State had themselves a very active day on Monday. He is going to be coming in, and he's going to be going to Utah State. As for Mr. King, he was able to average about 5.5 points, 4 rebounds per game this past season over at Butler, and had some nice numbers when he was over at Tulane as well. Shot about 40% from three-point range. He's going to be joining MJ Collins over there at Utah State, so that is a really good pickup for them, and I do think that things are starting to fill up relatively well for them as well. And then I did mention this in passing, but Jamel Jones, he also decided that he was going to be going to New Mexico State, and he is going to be joining another relatively rock-solid guy in Julius Mims that's going to be looking to elevate that program, and we're going to look to elevate your game with regards to taking a look at this great sport of college basketball. As right now, these championship teams, they're being built right now, and I'm keeping you guys abreast of everything that is happening there. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at Judent_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And big thanks once again to Curtis Rogers of 710 Seattle Sports for joining me in the live segment. Coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.